This is Scoreboard with Chris Titley. Powered by Swiftex. Where can crypto take you?
It's Chris Titley here, and we are live on Scoreboard, a podcast today, and we're on episode number 3 of our mini-series behind the scenes of sport. We've had 2 episodes already with Stu Smith from Vitalis, but today we've got Dave Hobart, the other founder of Vitalis, for a chat, all things sport and all things high performance. Dave, welcome to Scoreboard.
Pleasure, Chris. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The first 2 episodes, we delved into the likes of high performance and some attributes, and we could talk forever about that, and we'll continue to talk today about that. Dave is the other founder of the Vitalis Institute, a course that I just completed recently, actually, over 12 weeks. So I'm curious to know what your version is, or what you think of initially when someone says high performance.
Well, high performance obviously depends on context. What we've done at Vitalis, of course, is to bring our collective experience with sport. You know, Stu, all his work that he does with elite athletes across a range of disciplines, and my background, which is in investment. So, you know, for 30 years, I've been an investment professional and had my own hedge fund and have worked with a whole range of different investment professionals and portfolio managers and the like. So high performance, you know, it just depends on the context, but it's basically being able to operate at a level of performance sustainably through time that enables you to do whatever it is that you're doing it well. I mean, it's a pretty simple definition.
The fundamentals of that translate into business, into sport. And do you think there's any difference, broadly speaking, into business, sport, life? Is it all the same in terms of what you practice?
Well, I mean, there's obviously idiosyncratic differences in terms of the actual content. So what it is that you're actually needing to deliver. I mean, I've personally been working with portfolio managers, investment professionals for many years. And, you know, there's the psychological aspects of managing mindset in and around performance as an investment professional. And then there's the content, which is, you know, very different to someone that's a NBA basketballer, for example. But the actual how to get the mindset right, how to actually build the foundations to performance around well-being so that you can turn up as the best version of yourself at any given moment, like they're actually very similar. It doesn't matter what discipline you're involved in.
And when it comes to well-being and success and outcomes, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on well-being.
Well, I mean, well-being's it's a term that gets thrown about a bit, but our perspective is like you want to be able to, certainly with our corporate clients, et cetera, we want to be able to link well-being, so to speak, with what is the business there to do? What is that person within the business? What's their role? What are their KPIs? What are their objectives? Our concept of well-being, it's there's different parts to well-being, and a lot of people focus on one aspect. For example, it might be I've got to maintain. I know when I go for a run in the morning, I end up with more energy, etc. So they'll focus on the physical aspects of well-being, and that's one part of it. What we have recognized over many, many years is that to optimize well-being for sustainable performance, it's got to be looked at through a holistic lens. So, we look at physical health, physical fitness, your physical capacity. We look at mental clarity, like cognitive performance, executive function, like how do you maintain energy of the right part of your brain through time when you've got lots to do. Personal agency, which is basically taking responsibility for your outcomes in life. So having a sense of control in whatever it is that you're up to, whatever it is that you want to get out of life, knowing that you're responsible and you have a sense of control over it. Relationships, like we know that when people are off their game, I say off their game, like if people's relationships are slightly out of kilter, whether it's with a significant other or another family member or a child or even a work colleague, then performance is significantly impacted by just that one aspect of well-being. And then there's recovery. So recovery, people often think of it as time spent in an ice bath or in a sauna or something, which can be one aspect of recovery, but actually what it is really is nervous system regulation. So how do you make sure that you're processing stress really well so that you can do the stuff you need to do at a high level of performance? So it's when all those elements of well-being, those individual elements of well-being, are fully integrated that you get the magic. Like that's the stuff where it's a classic example of the whole is so much greater than the sum of the parts. But often what we find is that people might have one or two aspects of their well-being that they're focused on, but they're missing a lot of other stuff, and so subsequently that holistic nature of it and the benefits from the holistic approach are kind of missed.
A lot of the athletes that I've spoken to talk about trusting their process or trusting the process from a coach's point of view or their own point of view, particularly when they're injured or they're going through a bit of a recovery phase. I'm curious how you trust your own process, and there is frameworks to that, to think that maybe these frameworks are the solution to greater well-being.
Well, I mean, building any process is iterative, right? So you've got to actually have time in the game. You've got to be able to understand what works and what doesn't, and what works for you in certain environments, what doesn't, what works for others repeatedly in certain environments. So, we've, like I mentioned, over many, many years, we've sort of worked out what works, what doesn't. And, our processes are all very much evidence-based. So, yes, we have our own experience, but it's all, science-backed. I mean, it's a cliche, but actually the stuff that we talk to is, there's a world of research that sort of underpins it. So in terms of, I often have the expression, like if you want to get the best out of yourself, like there's plenty of different ways you can approach it. My experience is that our approach is a way. It's definitely a way that you can get the best out of your performance sustainably, and that's the key. So we can all be on point for a moment, but you've got to be able to do it sustainably through time, and that's why the importance of a holistic approach to it makes such a difference.
I've also talked to a lot of athletes that they say that one of the best pieces of advice they get is basically you're doing the reps, no one's watching, you're dancing while no one's watching, those types of things that are alone, they're personal, but over time you find the benefits and they compound and they get themselves into a good position. It's not, but then they get down to the MCG and there's 100,000 people cheering. It's not as easy as just jumping out and going to the MCG and having 100,000 people cheering. It's hard work, it's work ethic, but it's also getting those reps in place. What are some of the reps that you do on a daily basis or even a constant basis that help you?
It's a great question, Chris. So as context, like we all have to some extent noisy inner critics, or we reference our inner critic within the Vitalis framework as a chimp. Like it's the limbic system, and if you sort of don't understand how your brain works, like that inner critic or that chimp is actually just part of the machinery. If you don't have that context, then you can fall into this ruminative cycle or ruminative loop of, why do I always think this? Why am I? And I certainly, for a period of my life, was very susceptible to that. Had a very noisy inner critic that would often send me down these sort of ruminative spirals. And for me, it was often around this concept. That there's always a language, and if you think the limbic system is always trying to find the easy language to get you into a state of threat. Right, it wants you to kind of feel like it gets you on edge because that's its evolutionary task. It wants to keep you alive, So for me, it was always language around not being enough, or you'll look like an idiot, feel a fear of failure, that sort of thing. So easy for it to get me on edge, and so my daily practice is around that. So now, but basically, there's another part of my brain that has executive function over that chimp. that noisy, pesky inner critic. And so I have conversations with my chimp, but in the morning in particular, like I will often spend 10 minutes, no more, but I'll spend 10 minutes journaling. So free-form journaling is a great start to the day activity for me, purely for the purpose of calming my chimp, because I don't want, I'll wake up, my brain's been active overnight. I've had REM sleep where my brain's processing all the stuff that happened the day before. Sometimes I'll wake up with a feeling of discomfort, dis-ease, something a bit discombobulated, and that's just my chimp throwing messages into my brain to say, mate, wake up, pay attention, you might get eaten. But it's doing it in a form of, Dave, you're not enough. So how do I manage that? Well, that's absolutely, for me, it's 5-6 day a week thing where I'll write for 10 minutes just to calm my chimp when I first wake up in the morning. I exercise, this is where the whole weaving stuff is, the weaving of those 5 parts of holistic wellbeing are important. So I exercise 6 days a week. And, mornings for me are often a bit of zone 2. So, low heart rate, sort of long cadence stuff. I'll do 30 to 60 minutes of zone 2 physical exercise. And what does that do? It just improves my cognitive function. It gives me a bit of energy. It's obviously good for my mental well-being, and it's good for my longevity, my cardiovascular health and all that sort of stuff. But that's, again, I just have these little habits that just help me to keep myself calm, keep myself focused, give myself some executive or some cognitive capacity for the day. There's a whole range of different things that I do, most of which, are all part of what we do, because it's, for me, they're habits. Live and breathe it. They're useful, they're helpful. They, get me to the end of the day, and I'm not likely to bark at my wife or kick the dog or anything. I'm actually, by the end of the day, I've still got capacity to turn up at home as a better version of me. And, I'm not pretending that I'm perfect in any way, but there are just habit forming stuff that you can do that just gives you more capacity to be who you want to be, who you've declared yourself to be in life. And, that all that stuff works for me.
People talk about visualization, and they also talk about journaling a lot in the athlete context. I've started journaling more recently, and I haven't read them, firstly, which is, I'll get into that question in a second. But secondly, it generally starts a little bit negative, and then towards the end of the 10 minutes or 11 minutes today for me, it finished on a high note. Is that kind of a common thing?
Well, there's a few different ways you can journal. A simple way that I do it, which sounds a bit not dissimilar to yours, is like I just do it as it's like a mental vomit on the page when I get up, because I know, and I don't give it any more meaning than it needs. It's like, it's literally my limbic system feeling a little bit edgy. It's trying to get me to pay attention. I don't, if you think about the limbic system and where its low hanging fruit is to put you on edge, it's usually stuff related to something that happened or some events that happened when you were young, 10, 12 years old, thereabouts. So, that at that time you would have had some strong emotional, visceral reaction to a happening event at that time, and your brain's gone, I don't want you to experience that again. It might have been a shame thing. It might have been, I don't know. It's different for different people. But so that's what the limbic system does. So you wake up and you feel a reflection or a shadow or an imprint of that. And of course, it's not true, because, I'm in my early 50s. I'm not 10 or 12. My chimp's throwing up at me stuff because it's easy, because I still have a visceral or emotional memory of the stuff that happened back then. So, I just need to clear it. I don't need to make it real. I'm not going to give it more meaning than it requires. So what you've just described, which is like you write it and you haven't read it, well, that's exactly what I do. I just vomit, and often it'll start with my fears and my insecurities, my whatever, and it's all blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean anything. But then how I like to finish that journaling exercise, and I do this every single time, is to, I have an A5 book, and I, write blah, 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 blah for the first sort of page and a half. And then I go, So what's the one thing? And I write this down. What's the one thing I want to take forward from this? And then I write it down. Like there's something in the blah blah that I've written that's actually of value and forward looking. It's implementable. So notice the language I used, which was, what is the one thing I want to take forward from this? I didn't say, why the hell am I thinking this again? Because that sends me back into a ruminative cycle. I go, what is the one thing I can take forward from this? Which is, again, the language is forward looking. It puts my mind into a forward looking place. It's obviously it's positive. It's not negative. So naturally you're going to finish on a more positive setting. And when I put my pencil down after finishing journaling, I'm like, well, I'm actually clear. I don't, excuse the vernacular, but this idea of a shit tank, emotional shit tank, I've managed to empty it onto the page. So it's clear. And I find that insanely helpful because, it calms my whole kind of disposition, and it doesn't make me, I recognize that the voice of my inner critic or the voice of my chimp is not me. It's not the truth. It's only doing its job, which is to, keep me alive. And on that note, Chris, I know I'm rabbiting on a bit here, but I have a relationship with my limbic system, with my chimp, because the chimp, it's the fast part of your brain, right? Like it's the bit that's almost pre-conscious, and so it's got an infinitely better capacity to keep me alive in situations. Like so it's not like I have to shut my chimp up. It's not like I don't want my chimp. In fact, I absolutely want my chimp. It's part of who I am. My limbic system and my prefrontal cortex work together now. They don't fight each other. My prefrontal cortex has got executive function. It's the coach over the chimp, and the chimp wants a bit of guidance from me. But we work in partnership. I know this sounds a bit odd, like I'm talking about two different parts of me. But there's real magic in that, because it clears all the stuff out of the way. So all my fears, insecurities, anxieties are not getting in the way of what it is that I want to do in the world today. And it makes a massive difference. So that's a habit. There's plenty of others, but that's a habit.
You mentioned today, but then there are things which you can forward plan in your life as an athlete, the game on the weekend or the finals or whatever it might be, or the marathon that's pending. How do you go about in your brain thinking about the future versus thinking about now?
That's a great question. So in a sporting context, often people can get overwhelmed by anxiety if big events, etc. People will call them chokers, or they're not big game players, etc. Someone that gets a little bit overwhelmed by the anxiety of the moment. Well, it's actually not the anxiety of the moment. All that is a fear taken from the past and projected onto the future, which creates an anxiety. That's Dexter. Yeah, you can see
Dexter.
Yeah. So it's all that is it's a past experience, and the chimp. Hey, you might fail at this. You might look like an idiot. You might remember that time when you look like an idiot. So it's going to grab a fear from the past and it's going to project it onto the future, which is what's anxiety. It's like future-focused fear, right? So in a sporting context, what's really helpful is to actually be able to completely, get clear, get into the moment, right? So you'll need to have a conversation with your limbic system about, mate, we've done the work. Like you talked about it before, Chris. Like you've done the reps. We know where we are. We know how fast we go. If it's a rowing race or a running race or whatever, like we know our splits. We know our times. We know we've done the work. We know where we are. So it's only my past that's getting in the way by me throwing it in the future. So you have a conversation with your chimp around that and actually get present because there's a joy that you can experience in the moment of the actual endeavor itself. And if you can get present to that, wow, like, if you've done the work and you are at the top of your game and you can get present in the moment, then that's just, it's an experience of creation. Like, what's available to you is what you create in the moment, and that's really powerful, really liberating. And I use the word joy, like, it is actually a joyful thing.
I'd imagine the feeling sometimes of either like a Formula One driver or even a grand finalist in AFL, 100,000 people. There must be a little bit of pinch myself, enjoy the moment versus actually switching on and playing a really good game. I find that a little bit challenging sometimes, and we can digress on that conversation. But yeah, finding that
I don't think they're separate. I actually think they're the same. I'll give a simple example, and I'm not talking sheep stations here. I'm a middle-aged bloke who happens to do a bit of rowing, right? I'm a masters rower. The masters is a word invented by old people who wanted to get back into a rowing boat. It's actually like veterans rowing. So, but I've trained myself to be able to sit at the start of a national title race and experience the absolute gratitude, joy, connection, the experience of connection and gratitude at the start of a race, to the point where, I remember one time, I'm sitting at the start. I'm in Western Australia. I'm at the start of a rowing race, and a pelican flies overhead just before the start, and I'm almost bubbling over with gratitude, because, like, what a gift. Here I am, a middle-aged bloke. I have my health. I'm at the start of a race. It's on a Thursday afternoon. I get to do this. It's almost golden hour. So I'm really present to my environment, and a pelican flies overhead. It's like, oh my God. And then I put in the sort of race of my life type thing. So it's because I'm actually, like, I've done the work. Yes. There's sufficient confidence in the preparation, but it's because I'm not overwhelmed by the moment. I'm present to actually what's going on around me. And that makes a massive difference to performance.
The scoreboard, and even now they've reduced the kids to say there's no scoreboard and whatnot, but people still think about winning or losing.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm as competitive as all get out, right? Like and you're dealing with people we deal with people in high performance endeavors all day, whether it's sport or in corporate or in investing. People have a scoreboard, and it's important for them to be at the top of it, or to be punching out numbers or performances that, there's money riding on it. There's all that stuff. So, winning is an important part of it. However, it's not obviously solely about winning, and the distinction there is around relationship to self in the context of whatever it is that you're doing. So if you have tied up too much of your identity in the need to win this Olympic medal, and you're focused on how you look or your how you perceive yourself, whether you win or whether you come second or whether you come fourth, like, that's where people run into trouble. It's that when their identity is too tightly mixed into the performance that they do. And there's another part to that. So we look at relationship to self as a really important part of helping you to form better relationships in life generally. And the three parts to relationship to self are ego, or think of it in the context of reputation. So if you're too concerned about your own reputation, then your ego is a little bit unbalanced or unhealthy. Identity, self-identity, is the next part to having a healthy relationship to self. If you tie in your the need to win the gold medal to feel good about yourself because it's too attached to your identity, then that's going to be an impediment through time to sustainable performance. It may not be today, but through time, it'll definitely get in the way. And then there's self-trust is the other part, or self-esteem, I should say, really, is the other part to relationship to self. And that the foundation to a healthy self-esteem is actually doing what you say you'll do, like having a really strong relationship to your word, building self-trust through your relationship to your word, to yourself and to others, and that helps you to build a healthier self-esteem. But anyway, that was a slight aside.
It's taken me back to the Trevor Hendy episode, actually, where he did admit that he was winning at all costs, and it really cost him a lot from an identity point of view. It cost him his marriage, cost him his friendships, and he's rebuilt that over time. But it was very interesting to hear exactly what you've just said in regards to the obsession with winning, which I think at a junior level, some kids, I mean, they feel it when they don't win, which I think is a good thing. They're healthy, they actually care. But there is a deep obsession with winning. But anyway, we could talk about winning for a long time. I'm curious to talk about distractions and noise and keeping the inner circle or keeping things going. And some of the, we see we're in an age of social media, we're in an age of phones, we're in an age of lots of things that can distract us. I'm curious to know about your day, and you might have seen a few LinkedIn posts about me, about my pickup on my phones and things like that. But how embedded we are now, connected to devices and connected to data, I suppose, when it comes to high performance.
Yeah, interesting. We have we track in Vitalis. We track certain data points using our wearables. Heart rate variability or HRV, resting heart rate, sleep scores, that sort of thing, as a measure of recovery, really more than anything. But the data is always secondary. Like you don't want the data to be an obsession. The data, like I'll look at my HRV through time, and as my HRV rises, like my 7-day average HRV rises, I know it's because of the recovery activities I'm doing during the day, in the week, leading up to getting a shift in the HRV, and it's how it actually makes me feel that's most important. So it's a confirmation of the activity that I'm doing and the output of that activity in terms of how it's improving my day, how it's improving my relationships at the end of the day. And then the data is literally like confirmation that I'm doing the right stuff. So it's not, the data itself is not the end game. But in terms of, access and overuse of social media and data all the time, well, that's a massive part of the world that we live in. And, one of the key parts to our programs is we have a big conversation around our dopamine reward system and dopamine regulation, our dopamine thresholds, and how that ties into the chimp, the limbic system. Often the cheap dopamine sources are food for the chimp, and they kind of reinforce each other all day. So how do you get agency or control over your time, agency and control over your responses, reactions? You're reaching for the phone to avoid discomfort, etc. Once you've sort of got a little bit more control over that, you'll notice how much time you were wasting, like how much additional capacity you can actually find for yourself once you have some awareness of they're not instinctive responses. We call them instinctive responses or reactions, but they're subconscious or preconscious reactions often. But we can actually have agency over them. We can control them.
The frightening and alarming thing around the phone pickups for me there's screen time and then there's pickups. I'm more looking at pickups because sometimes you might have screen time in the car, or you might have Google Maps on,
sure,
whatever it might be. So it's the reaching for the phone, and it was 150 times a day for me, which 1,000 times a week. And when you say that out loud and you say, I might have a little bit more time if I didn't pick up my phone 1,000 times a week.
Yeah.
People will go, oh yeah, 1,000 times a week. I'm like, no, it's a literal figure. So I've found already picked up more time and more thinking time around relationships and exercise and forward thinking and clear thinking, I suppose. And the last topic we'll talk about today is sleep. We have a lot of athletes that do talk about how their sleep and how they go till 1 a.m. because their brain's wired after a game and they get a rubbish sleep and they sleep poorly the night before games, etc. And I'm just curious for, a little bit of understanding around what you think is pivotal to getting a better night's sleep.
There's a couple of things to sleep that make a massive difference in my world. So there's the obvious stuff, which is, pre-sleep sort of hygiene. So what is it you do? If I'm going to eat a piece of chocolate cake 15 minutes before I go to bed, I might fall asleep. It's not going to be it's not going to be good quality sleep. Too much sugar, or if I'm going to have that third glass of wine, within an hour of going to bed, like I'm going to end up with a impacted sleep. There's just no doubt about it. If I'm going to bed with variable times all the time, like, a standard bed might be 9:30 and then I go to bed at, midnight, it's just going to impact my sleep score. So there's certain things that you build muscle around that helps you to understand how your rhythms work, what works for you and what doesn't. I've now named a few of them there. Devices in the bedroom's an obvious one. Like, get them out of the room. Don't look at a device. You might check a message or whatever, but don't leave it in a separate room. To put it on silent. Don't have things to distract you. But that they're all pretty obvious. The thing that's surprising around sleep, though, is actually what you do during the day in your daytime recovery routines that impacts sleep. So if you manage your recovery well during the day by doing some simple recovery exercises, you'll find within a week, if you're measuring your sleep by way of sleep scores, it'll go up by 10 points just by doing some parasympathetic, we'd call them. So it's trying to stimulate your stimulate, it's probably the wrong word, but engaging your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest and recovery part of your nervous system, versus what we sit in most of the day, which is sympathetic, so action, stress, fight, flight kind of stuff. So if we can engage in a few exercises during the day to stimulate or engage our parasympathetic nervous system, things like some breathing exercises, which take about a minute, in between meetings, some incidental movement, a couple of times a day, might sit outside for 10 minutes and then get a bit of sunshine with no technology, little activities. That doesn't take much, but if you can spend a bit of time, a few times a day, just being conscious about daytime recovery, i.e. parasympathetic activities, you will sleep better. London Bridge to a brick. So, there's pre-sleep, the sleep hygiene, and then there's daytime recovery. And if you manage those two well, you will sleep better, no question.
Dave, we've definitely got an episode 4 in us for sure of this, because I could talk all day about it, and I very much enjoy the chat and also the relationship with high performance in sport and in business and in hedge funds. You're speaking my language when you're talking about business and sport and all these tips. And thank you very much for sharing some of the tips that you have and that Stu has at Vitalis. As someone that's done the 12-week course, I very much encourage people to jump onto the website and have a look. Purely because some of these tips, not all of them, some of them I'm working on and certainly seeing that sleep score tick up, which makes me a little win, which is great. And little wins bring more wins, which bring momentum. So thank you so much for the chat today.
Good on
Dave.
you, Chris. No, thank you. Perfect.
Looking forward to catching up again.
Indeed. Thanks, Chris. Cheers.
This has been another episode of Scoreboard with Chris Titley.